Well, hi everyone, this is Kathie from The Quiet Rebellion, and today we have Lisa from the Retro Housewife Goes Green with us, and we're going to talk all about vintage skills. How are you today, Lisa?
Good, how are you?
I am great, thank you. And it is winter, but we are surviving. It will not be winter, or it'll be kind of almost spring by the time this comes out. But we're going to talk to you today about vintage skills, which is something Lisa knows a lot about and shares a ton about on her social media and her blog and newsletter. And it's all quite wonderful. I've been a follower and a subscriber for a long time, and we'll share links for you all to do that as well. So let's talk first, let's classify vintage skills for folks before we dive into the other questions. Go ahead and tell us what you think are vintage skills.
I tend to think of the kinds of things that our grandmas and great-grandmas did, cooking from scratch, mending instead of buying something new, trying to use things you already have. And my great-grandma was raised in the Great Depression, and, she did without and sometimes would have to go find food for her family. But she had those skills and knowledge and was able to take care of her family. And a lot of that's being lost now. And I think even in the early pandemic, we learned that just knowing how to cook was something very useful that a lot of people don't know anymore. It helps you be more self-sufficient if you have some of those skills.
Great. And why do you think in 2025 that vintage skills are important?
Well, as things are kind of crazy right now, we're finding there's a lot more shortages of things that we are used to finding. A lot of people are finding their incomes a little lighter, job insecurity. So knowing that you can take care of things on your own and that you can be somewhat self-sufficient can be very useful. Add a sense of security to your life.
And because we are talking on the Quiet Rebellion, how do you see that as kind of being rebellious quietly, obviously, because it's not a very loud thing necessarily. So how do you see that fitting into kind of a quietly rebellious life for people?
It's one way you can kind of stop with the overconsumption and participating as much in capitalism and, voting with your dollars and being more thoughtful and mindful of what you're doing and what you're putting out there as well as what you're consuming, and can help us to slow down and be more mindful in every aspect of our life.
Right. And because I practice a lot of these vintage skills myself and quite like them, but I am also very much a feminist, and I know you are as well. And so how can a modern feminist, such as ourselves, embrace and be empowered by vintage skills and not feel like they are oppressive? Perhaps, or maybe perpetuating the whole kind of trad wife mythology that I don't really subscribe to or believe in any way, and I know that you don't either. So how can it be empowering to us, but also still allow us to be very modern feminists?
I think a big difference is, we're not glamorizing the past, we're learning from it, and it's all about choice. Feminism isn't supposed to be that we all have to be the same way, but that we are choosing how we want to live. And having these skills can help us be more responsible and help us to not be reliant on other people and the system that can sometimes be very oppressive to women. It helps us take back power and be more responsible for ourselves. A lot of times in history, we've wanted people not to know how to do things because it helped keep them oppressed. You can fight back by knowing these skills and not being reliant on capitalism and the government right now or anything else that may hold you back.
Right. And I know for myself, right, like I quite love to bake a cake and garden and, do a lot of the very domestic things. But I also very much like having a bank account in my own name and running a business and the fact that I can own property, so, and I think that I do believe that you can do both. I don't know that you can necessarily have it all, but you can certainly have a lot if you choose to do it mindfully, which is very much kind of, it sounds like exactly what you're talking about. Let's do this all very mindfully. And we can also very much take advantage of modern technology, right? Like I know that you bake bread and you also will knead the dough with your KitchenAid mixer, for example, which is absolutely what I do. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do it all by hand the way that grandma might have done it because she didn't have these other options to her.
I love my dishwashers.
Right. And I will say I have baked bread for a long time by hand. A couple of years ago, some people had asked me on my blog, had asked me about if they could make a particular recipe in the bread maker. And I was like, oh, I don't have a bread maker. I never have had one. I don't know. But I ended up finding one at a thrift store. And I was like, okay, well, I'll test it. And I still kind of prefer bread by hand. Something about the bread maker kind of, I think, over needs it or something. It's just a little different. But I'm not going to tell anyone they shouldn't use a bread maker, because it still turns out a wonderful loaf of bread that you can have for sandwiches or whatever. And so if that's, if you're working a full-time job or also raising kids and taking care of people there, time is often very busy for most of us, because it's just modern life can be very chaotic. And so what we're talking about, for busy folks who maybe work outside the home or have all these other things, right? Maybe your spouse is sick and you're raising children and you're also trying to make an income because we all have to make money. We all have to support ourselves somehow. How can they start practicing vintage skills in a way that's doable for them? If they have say they have no experience, but they want to start, what is something they can do?
I always just say, it's one step at a time. Don't try and do everything at once. It's often what I see in any kind of lifestyle changes people make is they want to do it all. But instead, picking one thing, especially something that you are interested in, like if the idea of baking bread is super cool to you, you're going to be more likely to follow through that task. Learning how to make more meals for your family can be a really easy place to start. If you have a favorite clothing item that's sitting somewhere with a hole in it, learn how to mend that one thing and pick something that's going to draw your interest and just do it one step at a time. None of us can do it everything.
Right.
But every little bit helps. Also, building a community. If there's a skill you don't want to learn, but somebody else does, if you have a friend that likes to sew, they can mend for you and you bake them a loaf of bread. You don't have to know everything. And it's pretty impossible to know everything. As somebody with ADHD that I call myself a hobby collector, I still can't do all of it, and definitely not all of it well.
Right. And I think I know, because while I don't have ADHD, I am like endlessly curious about everything. And so, but I often know, like a few years ago, I was like, I am good, because I had taken a mushroom class and mushroom identification and liking class. And I was like, and he was talking about how to use it for dyes. And I was like, oh, I am going to make everyone pajamas and I'm going to dye the fabric because I know how to sew already. And then I was like, I'm never going to do that. Like, as much as I would like to do it, there's just no way to fit that into everything else I'm already doing and want to do, right? Like, we have choice. We have to make choices. Sometimes there are things we have to do, go to work, pay the bills. And sometimes there are things we want to do, like bake bread or garden or do whatever. And we have to just kind of choose when we want something new. Sometimes we just, have 14,000 knitting projects going at the same time. Right. So I think I always say that you just have to kind of find time. But also I think, and I imagine that you agree with this, that once you start, the more you do it, the better you become, the more efficient, the quicker things often become. Do you think that's true I think that's true for everything, whether it's technology or, baking bread or canning or whatever. So do you think that's true as well? Like for vintage skills, the more you do it?
Yeah. And it somewhat becomes a habit, and it's just something that you do and you don't think about it as much, and it becomes kind of second nature. It doesn't have to be some big elaborate thing. And a lot of times, even like cooking, people think it has to be some 5-course fancy meal. But if you just know how to make a few good meals that your family likes, it doesn't have to be fancy. I mean, a lot of the comfort foods we like are not fancy.
Right.
Same thing with, like, if you're mending something, it doesn't have to look perfect. Right. If it works. Perfection gets in the way of a lot of things.
Right. And I think social media is, because when you said mending, like, I think that, we can see the beautiful visible mending that some people do. It's gorgeous. I love it. I very rarely do it. Right. Like, I'm just going to fix it so that it's good.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a balance. So you don't have to do it, like you said, perfectly every time. It just has to be sometimes good enough. Aim for a B+, not an A+, kind of thing. Right. Perfect. That's such a great way to say it. And I think when you were talking about meals, one of the things I think, especially in the world of like social media and food blogging, is that we think people eat like fancy or something new all the time. And I have found for myself and for most people I know, we eat a lot of the same meals on repeat. Right. We have taco salads probably once a week. So, I mean, like, because we buy half a cow at a time. And so there's a lot of ground beef that comes with that. And that's easy. Right. So, and I feel like I think we have a misconception that a lot of people aren't like that. Do you find that to be true? Like, you probably do eat a lot of the same kind of things.
Yeah, we have a lot of the same kind of things. I like to cook, so we, like once a week or something, we'll try something new and
Right.
try and put new things into the rotation. But we still have those standby favorites that we go to all the time. Like quesadillas a lot. We do breakfast for dinner. Alfredo pasta is a must around here. And a lot of times when we're thinking, what do we want? We end up just being like, well, we just want these same things that we always have. And there's some comfort in that.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people with meal planning even like have, like my mom set certain days for different things. Like they have Taco Tuesday. And then like, that way, even if there's a little variety with those different meals, it's easy to meal plan because she knows what type of meal is going to be each day.
Right. Right. And I think meal planning too has become this thing where it's like super overwhelming. Whereas it's really, like I said, we eat the same things kind of on repeat and we're okay with that. And we're also only a household of 2. So leftovers are our friend and we're fine with that. I know some people don't like leftovers, so don't cook for them, I guess. But so yeah, I agree. Like, let's just remember that it doesn't have to be super fancy all the time. And if you do, like us, if you like to cook, it's fine to, have a day or two now and then where you can experiment and play, because that's fun too if you like to cook. I mean, if you don't like to cook. And I think it's important to remember that a sandwich is a perfectly acceptable meal, even for dinner. When I first got married, I was 26. I wasn't exactly young, but I came from an old world kind of family, like Italian immigrants and Serbian immigrants. And so there was this idea that dinner had to be like dinner, right? Like it had to be like roast and gravy and potatoes. And so like I had a really hard time being okay with like grilled cheese and tomato soup. My husband had none of that, thankfully. He was just like, I don't care. Food is food. So I think it's okay for all of us to realize that it's okay to have sandwiches if that's what you want to have and not have to fuss about other things. And when we talk about vintage skills, I think depending on the generation of your grandparents, you may still have some of that kind of noise where it has to be fancy schmancy all the time and you have to get out the good china. And I don't think we have to do that. I would find that really oppressive if I had to do that every day. Because, sometimes...
Well, even that somewhat romanticized,
yeah.
Like my grandma was more 60s, but she's still, like, she was never a fancy cook. They ate very simple meals.
Mm-hmm.
My great grandma was during the Great Depression, so what they could find.
Right.
But looking through like real meal plans that housewives used in their journals and stuff, they had that same idea that, oh, I'm supposed to do all these perfect things and stressing about it. And a lot of them didn't end up doing it. It was kind of like the social media today is entertainment of, women's magazines and stuff.
Right.
It's still the idyllic thing that not everybody really ever obtained.
It's important to remember that marketing is really insidious. What we think is real and what is actually marketing are really different things often. So it's important to remember that. And thank you for pointing that out because it is really true.
I read a lot of 1950s magazines and they were struggling with the same things as us. There's always articles like how to make dinner time faster and less stressful, and meals that you could put everything just in the oven and not worry about, and how to reuse leftovers. We've all always struggled with finding enough time. This idea that you can do it all is fabricated and always has been.
Right. Like, I'm not ironing sheets. I'm not. I mean, it's fine if somebody else wants to do it. I'm not going to do it. Right. So I've always wondered. I've never known a single person in my life who has ironed their sheets, but I understand that people do.
My mom does.
Does she really?
I don't even iron my clothes.
Yeah, I mean, I will if something's really wrinkly and I have to go out in public, but it's pretty rare. Yeah. And it's funny because I mostly often pull the ironing board out because I'm quilting and I need to press the seams, or because I'm doing some sort of photo shoot for the blog and I want like something underneath it and I don't want it to be all wrinkly. That's terrible, but true. So there you go, everybody. When you see a photo on and it looks perfectly pressed, I did it just simply for the photo. So how can we learn vintage skills, do you think? Are there really good places or ideas for someone to start who, say, has very minimal skills to begin with? How would we go about learning these things?
Well, that's one place that technology is our friend, and there are YouTube videos to learn everything. I used one this weekend to learn how to fix cracks in drywall. There are blogs, shameless plug, my blog, Retro Housewife Goes Green. I share a lot of that kind of stuff. Libraries have a lot of vintage homemaking books and cookbooks that can be really helpful in learning different skills that maybe haven't been passed down in your family. You can sometimes find community centers where people give workshops. A lot of times retired people give workshops on skills, and asking older relatives to help you. I mean, grandparents are almost always happy to teach you something and talk to you about things and how they used to do things. Local experts sometimes you can find to learn different things for like gardening. Uh, there's often various community centers around you that have classes, and talking to your friends. If you know somebody that bakes a lot of bread and you want to learn how to bake bread, ask your friend for advice. There are endless possibilities now, which makes it a lot easier than when things have to be passed down. If you didn't get it passed down from family, at one point it was going to be hard to learn because you couldn't just go on the internet and find a video.
Right. That's right. And I will see for some, I'm all of my grandparents have passed on. So, but my grandmas were very important to me when I was growing up, very special to me. And they're still incredibly, like, there's just nothing I don't do that I don't feel like they have touched in my life. And I didn't learn enough from them. I learned a lot, but I didn't learn enough because I didn't ask. Not because they weren't willing, because I didn't ask. Yeah. And so for anyone else who's like, if you have those people in your life, you have to ask. You have to ask them, because you will be sorry later in life that you don't have that person to teach you. Not that you can't find another teacher, but there's something special about if you have that person in your life who already knows, they will be so honored to pass that on to you. I just know they will be so glad. Like my grandmother was so glad to teach me how to sew. I can remember being very young and her teaching me how to sew a napkin, right, on her sewing machine. That was kind of a treadle machine, but we figured it out. And so and then I learned how to quilt and I learned how to do it, but I didn't learn how to embroider from her. And now I wish I had learned how to do that. And so if I had asked, she would have gladly taught me. So I'm going to ask everyone to just ask. And, the other thing is that if you can find classes or whatever, I teach canning classes at my local community college, or I have in the past. And I haven't done it since before the pandemic, but I used to teach canning classes quite a bit. And what I learned from because these were adults who took the classes, right, was that often skills skipped a generation. So grandma knew how to can, mom wasn't interested. Now grandma has passed on, mom didn't learn, and now I have to learn, right? Or, and I had men in my classes too, so I don't want to pretend it was just women. So it's important to ask and important to seek it out when you can. If you're community college, online is a wonderful, an amazing resource. I'm a lover of vintage books, and so I almost never pass one up at a yard sale or a thrift store, because they happen to be a wealth of information that, like, especially cookbooks, that modern cookbooks don't always have. Modern cookbooks are really beautiful and they have really great recipes, but they don't often also have like the basics, whereas a vintage cookbook will have the basic, like, this is how you make a white sauce, and this is what this cut of meat should look like, and this is how you should, so that kind of thing. If you're really new, those old books can also have a lot of fabulous things. Even sewing books or whatever will teach you how to do a basic.
Well, and while libraries are a great resource, also archive.org, you can find a lot of good vintage books on there to read for free. Some of them you have to have an account, but it's a free account.
Right.
And you can find some really interesting resources there. It's really important, I think, that we remember some of those things from the past. We're losing a lot of all those past skills and resources because people don't buy physical media anymore.
Right.
So it's good to read a lot of that stuff.
And I think it's important, not that we can all be historians or preservationists, but to some extent it's important to save. One of the things, and I've said this in multiple podcasts coming up, but like one of the things we have gained a lot from technology, but I'm also terrified of what we're losing in this rush to do everything faster, better. I don't always know. So I feel like that preserving some history will allow us to not lose everything. Because I already know we have lost things to generations. I mean, obviously we've lost languages. We've lost a lot. And so I fear for us by losing in this idea that everybody has to be like the same, right? Which is just it's such a shame. And vintage skills are a great way to just preserve what has happened and make them still fit our modern lives, but not lose all of the things that came before. So great. All right. And how do you think, when we think, obviously vintage skills are very important inside our homes and helping us be a little more self-reliant and self-sufficient, but how can we use vintage skills to kind of empower and support our communities outside of our homes? Our neighbors or our local town, do you think that's possible as well? And if so, how?
Yeah, sharing skills you've learned with others is one helpful thing you can do. Bartering with neighbors if they're good at something. They have chickens, give them a loaf of bread for eggs, and it can help with mutual aid because a lot of times we forget that people that are out doing physical work for resistance and protesting and things, they need food.
That's right.
Give them a meal. A very important part of the Montgomery bus protests were the women that were making meals for the people that were protesting. And that continues to be important, taking care of people's kids while they're doing other things. There's a lot of ways you can help. Sometimes you can make crafts and sell them, and that's a way that you can donate money if you don't have other financial ways to help. And that it makes us all less reliant on a harmful system. So that helps the community at large. It's just all about building community and supporting each other.
One of my favorite local charities in my little town, like actually very local charity, has in the summer they have a community refrigerator, and you can just go and drop off the extras from your garden. And I grow some things specifically to take there, right? Like, and I always have extras, right? Like once I've made enough pickles, the extra pickling cucumbers go there. I only need so much, and pickles tend to be quite productive. If we have too many apples or too many whatever that we can't go through, we just honestly take it down there. And so I love that. And one of the other things they did recently was they did a pie auction fundraiser. And so I made a pie and I bought a pie. So, these are the things that we can do. And sometimes you may have to seek this out. So something I said in an earlier podcast was like, we can't all do all the things. So pick, a charity or two or a mutual aid organization that you like in your area and just go all in for that thing instead of trying to be, because obviously everyone's time is very limited and we all can only do so much. So pick one or two things and go for it. So if it is, you can, if you like to knit and you probably like me, you've knitted everybody, a hat already, maybe knit hats for the homeless shelter or, that kind of thing. So those are all kinds of things.
I think sometimes we try and force people to be a part of movements in ways that aren't comfortable for them or aren't their skill sets. And that doesn't end up being as productive as if you had them doing something they were good at. We each have different abilities and skills, and utilizing those better is going to be better for the movement than trying to force everybody to do the same thing.
Right.
And there's a lot of room in any movement or resistance for everybody. And this idea of perfection or that we all have to do the same thing is only harmful.
That's right. That is so true. Because people like myself, and I think you're probably an introvert too. I'm an introvert. I feel like you're an introvert.
Yes.
Just based on what I know of you, I feel like that's true. So let the extroverts do the extroverted things, right? And support them, but do the introverted things and know that both are really important to every cause that you're working on. So I think that's kind of the reason I started the Quiet Rebellion. While I believe that it's really important to be loud, some of us just are uncomfortable or unable to do that in any sort of effective way. I'm a good writer and I try to write about the things that are important to me, but I also know that there are people who are more knowledgeable and better than I am in other areas. So I think, I agree with you. Let's make sure that we're just being supportive in whatever way we can for our communities and the movement in general, and loving people. Like, let's love people and support them. A big part of what we do here. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you feel like you would like to add to Vintage Skills that I didn't ask about? Did I miss anything really important?
I don't think so.
Well, tell everybody where they can find you online, please.
The best place to find me is retrohousewifegoesgreen.com. I have some other sites as well, but they're linked there, and that's the one that I talk about vintage living and skills on the most. I'm also on basically every social media platform. You can find me either as Retro Housewife Goes Green, or a couple of them are just Retro Housewife. If you search Retro Housewife Goes Green, it'll still show up.
And we'll, of course, link them in the show notes for everybody to see.
And both of us are part of the Sustainable Living Collective. That's a new site where people can learn all kinds of vintage skills and homesteading. And so that's a great resource for people. It's a ad-free environment. It's highly moderated, so you can feel safe and comfortable posting it.
And Lisa started it and made it beautiful, and it's gorgeous, and I'm just tagging along. It is really a wonderful place and very welcoming and science-based, and we're just going to be a good place for people to chat about good things. And I've already learned a couple of things about knitting, and we talked about gluten-free sourdough. I'm not gluten-free, but I enjoyed reading about it, so it is a great place. And it's because it's not on social media, it's like free of all the distractions when you go there. You don't have to like wade through 14,000 AI accounts like you do on Facebook to see the stuff that you want to see. So it's really quite.
And it's not designed to draw you in for several hours. You can go on there, interact a little bit, and go about your day.
Right. And I have it set so that I get a daily digest of like what happened, and I can just kind of scroll through the email and then go over and interact with what I want. And if something didn't happen and I don't feel like it, then I don't feel pressure to do it either, which is really a wonderful thing. Because it's important to be online, but it's also important to be offline.
Yes. Balance is important in most things.
And it's hard because I have found myself doom scrolling more than I would like lately. But
They design those algorithms just suck you in, and all of a sudden you think, I'm going to be on here for 15 minutes. Oh, it's been 2 hours.
Yes, I know. It's very much all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lisa. We will include all of the links in the show notes, and I will have people find you on your website. Thank you so much.
Thank you.